Welcome to this video, how to analyze a position. Today we're going to do one exercise from the book 1001 Chess Exercises for Club Players by Frank Erwich. Frank is a Dutch chess trainer who was raised with the step method. And in his book 1001 Chess Exercises there are over 100 exercises on defending. And they are very good. I can recommend the book, and especially that chapter on defending. So we're going to use our usual framework for how to analyze. So we start with the orientation. What has changed in the positions since the last move of our opponent? What's the plan of my opponent? Then we look at the characteristics of the position before we go to calculation and evaluation, and part of the calculation is of course the visualization of the different variations. And building visualization skills is important in itself. So it is a deliberate choice by me not to show all the moves or show all the moves by arrows, because I hope that my viewers learn to better visualize by watching my videos. And finally, we verify the calculation, so we look once more outside in. We visualize the move that we selected, and then we really ask ourselves the question, did I consider the strongest reply of my opponent? With that introduction, let's go to the position. So here we have the position, and if you want to make this into an active learning session, stop the video, take a piece of paper and write down what you think is the orientation in this position. So it's clear black is to move, because actually black is in check. And black is not only in check, there's an undefended knight on a5. And so black is faced with a double attack. And when you look at this position, you are seeing that the knight cannot help in resolving this double attack. And we also don't have another piece. We cannot play queen d5, like defending the knight and at the same time blocking the check. So it looks like we're going to lose the knight on a5 in this position. And if we look to the current material, the material is equal. And we have a knight on a5 versus a bishop on e5. So in this position, material equal, black is in check, white has a double attack on the knight on a5 and the king on g8. So what kind of assets does black have in this position? Well, black sees, of course, that the white king is vulnerable. The pawn structure in front of the white king has been damaged. And when you look at this position, you start to think like, okay, I have probably an attack after the queen takes on a5 with queen g4 followed by rook d2. Right? So the question is, how strong is our counterattack? So I'd like to ask you, before we start looking at candidate moves, right, just visualize white takes on a5, and is the attack by black winning, or is it just a major threat? So how strong is that counterattack with queen g4 or rook d2 in this position? So visualize the move. Queen takes a5, right? We didn't do a move yet for black, but first we want to find out how strong is our counterattack with queen g4 followed by rook g2. And that is, I think, what black has in this position, because we will be down a full piece. And after the queen moves from a2, of course the rook can come to d2. So that square is now available. So queen g4, king h1, rook d2 threatens mate on g2. Neither of the rooks can interpose, no rook e2, and also no rook f2. White doesn't have any checks in that position that are safe because d5 and a2 are covered by the rook on d2. And after rook g1, black has mate in 1 with queen f3. So we see that actually if we just look at our counterattack, rook d2, queen g4 is very strong, assuming that white plays king h1. But how about king f2? Right, so we are now in the process that we visualize queen takes a5, queen g4, king f2, rook d2. The king goes to e3. And before I draw the lines in the position, I want to ask you, can you find an attack for black there that wins? So we have queen on a5, queen g4, and then king f2, rook, king f2, rook d2, king e3. And when we were doing attacking targets, we found a nice rule of thumb, like 2 moves with the same color and mate. And in this position, it's actually quite difficult. So you could say, I'm going to pick up the black queen, and can I put it on a square where it is mate? So, and then you will find the route to that square later. So let's have a look, right? What was I talking about? Queen g4, king f2, rook g2, king e3. So we have this. And in that position, I say pick up the queen on g4 and put it anywhere on the board, and it has to be mate and defend the rook on d2. And then you will find that queen d3 would be checkmate. And now we're going to the next step and figure out what is the route of the queen on g4 to the square d3. And then you will find the backward move, right? That the queen will go to d7 and then will go to d3. And we have to figure out, is there a defense for white against that mate? Well, it doesn't look at first hand, right? Because the queen has no checks, and the queen can only give up herself by playing queen b5. So we see that actually we have a very strong counterattack. That is actually winning. So the question is, now let's look at the candidate moves, right? So we're in this position, and how can black defend? And there are several ways to interpose, right? We can play rook f7, we can play queen f7, we can play rook e6. So there are several ways to interpose, and there's one way, right, to move away and play the move king f8. Now, based on the analysis that we did in evaluating our counterattack, right, it would be illogical to inactivate one of our attackers. So when you look at this position and you do your analysis, it would be illogical to play queen f7, because then the queen can no longer go to g4, and to play rook d2. So that leaves us, practically speaking, with 3 candidate moves, right? So we have as candidate moves king f8, queen e6, and rook e6, because those are the 3 moves that don't instantly lose a piece like knight c4, but also keeps our counter-attack with queen g4, rook d2 in the position. Now we have to figure out what the difference is. So queen e6 allows the trade on e6. But after queen takes a5, we get our counterattack with queen g4 followed by rook d2. But can we avoid the trade on e6 and go for more with either king f8 or rook e6? So I'm going to take away for now this, and we have two candidate moves left to evaluate: king f8 and rook e6. So let's evaluate king f8, right? Let's start there and assume that this happens. Queen g4, king h1, rook d2. In the previous position, white didn't have any checks. Well, given the threat of mate on g2, right, you look for forcing moves from the white side to defend. So you look at checks and captures. And if the king is on f8, suddenly white has a check. Can you find a check? I mean, there are several checks, but there's one that allows white to coordinate their pieces. And can you find how white can organize a defense after king f8? Right, and the solution is white can play queen c5. So the rook is there, then queen c5, check, the king moves back, and interpose with the rook, rook f2. So in the initial evaluation that we were doing, there were no checks, but because the king moved to f8, suddenly there's a check on c5, and white can organize themselves by playing the move rook f2. So king f8 is not the solution that we are interested in. So how about rook e6, because that also prevents the trade of the queens. So let's go into the same line, right? We have rook e6, queen takes a5, queen g4, king h1, rook d2, threatening mate on g2. Again, we ask ourselves the question, does white have any forcing moves in that position? Can you find a defense against queen g2 checkmate? And because the rook moved away from the back rank, suddenly white has to move queen takes a8, queen a8, check, and the king goes to the 7th rank, and then we follow up with queen takes b7, and then the queen is defending the square g2, right? So the king moves here, and then we play queen takes b7, and the queen is defending the square g2. So we see that, let's go back to the original position. Let me get the arrows out of the way. Right, let's look one more time, look at the different options. We say queen f7 or rook f7 are not good candidate moves because we lose our counterattack. And we see that after king f8 and rook e6, white suddenly has two checks. After king f8, white has to check queen c5 followed by rook f2, and after rook e6, white has to check queen a8 followed by queen takes b7. So this is our calculation, right? So what is the conclusion in this position, right? So we are here subject to a double attack, about to lose the knight on a5. And we found that after queen e6, queen takes a5, we found a nice winning line with queen g4, king h1, rook d2, no checks for white because the rook is covering a2 and d5, and there are no checks on the back rank. And we saw that if the king moves up to f2, we had this nice rook d2, king e3, queen d7, and white has to give up their queen to prevent the checkmate, to cover the square d3. So what is the conclusion? Is black winning in this position? So we now go to the final step, verification. Did you consider the strongest reply by white? So we selected as our move queen e6, and we assumed that white would execute their double attack by playing queen takes a5. But if white would be a good calculator, white would say, I'm losing by force, so my strongest reply in this position is to trade the queens and then go into this endgame, which is equal. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you want to see more, please subscribe, like, and I will continue to make more videos based on the step method and this analysis framework. Thank you for your attention.